Resident Evil 4 originally came out around the time that there was a huge renaissance in gaming. There were so many different projects that were released between 2005 and 2010 that would basically set the foundation for the way games would be released in the future and how games would be designed. For example, because we had Resident Evil 4 in 2005, this would actually be one of the main influences behind the success of Dead Space, which would release in 2008. This would be the same situation for games like Gears of War, which inspired many multiplayer games that came after it. But Resident Evil 4 is a special kind of game. It worked both in its original format and in the remake because of how well crafted the story is and how the combat changed from its former games. Now, to get into what I wanted to talk about today I want to talk about Resident Evil and what about Resident Evil was so amazing and what kind of made it the success that it is. Now, I have played the original game, but I am going to avoid talking about the original game as I want to focus directly on the remake. And that's mainly because the remake has been fixed to match what modern audiences want in a third-person shooter. But I'll get into more of that in the video. But before we get into it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment your thoughts down below. What is your favorite moment from Resident Evil 4's remake, or what was your favorite dialogue line from the original game? I know people are divided on this game because you have old fans and new fans who both love the games passionately. Again, I'm not here to try to persuade you from your opinion. I'm just here to give you my opinion on that, whether it's right or not. But let's grab our overpowered RPGs, get infected by Las Plagas, and let's QTE our way into the things that made Resident Evil 4 so amazing. Now, I'm going to go quickly into the story for this game, just briefly. I'm not going to cover all of the things that went on in this game, just because I just want this to be a story summary. But the game starts off with Leon Kennedy making his way into Spain to track down the kidnapped daughter of the US president, and Leon is being guided by Hunnigan, who is working remotely to help him complete his mission. Now, a lot has gone down with Leon since we last saw him in Raccoon City. Leon has been hired by the US government to become an agent, and he is trained under Jack Krauser. There's actually a whole spin-off game that goes into his time with Jack Krauser, and this story will actually play a main role in this game because Operation Javier is mentioned a lot in the remake. And Operation Javier was the mission where Leon was sent in to support Jack Krauser and his team as they try to kidnap a drug lord named Javier Hidalgo, who is in the process of trying to buy a bioweapon from Umbrella. Now, if you've played the game, you remember that this mission turned into a shit show, and Jack Krauser's entire team would be wiped out, and Krauser would be wounded in his arm, where he becomes afraid that the government will try to throw him away like garbage. And he was actually slightly correct about that, because after the mission ends, Leon ends up defeating the bioweapon, and Krauser is discharged from the military. And this brings us to the modern timeline in Resident Evil 4. During this mission, Leon is escorted into Spain by two guards who are killed while tracking down the village, and eventually when he finds the village, he finds Luis Serra, and he gets knocked out and gets infected by Chief Menendez, who's like the leader of the village. After this, obviously Leon is knocked out and he wakes up chained to Luis, and the pair eventually escape. And after exploring the village and fighting through the Los Illuminados infected villagers, you find Ashley inside of the church, and she has been infected by Las Plagas as well. Now, both Leon and Ashley are going to have to fight their way through the village and try to find a way to cure the infection. The pair will be pursued by Chief Menendez until eventually a boss fight occurs, and after turning into a monster, Leon is able to kill the village chief. After this fight, however, Ashley and Leon will be pursued by the Los Illuminados cult into the castle, and that's where they take refuge. It is here where Ashley will get kidnapped by the mini-me of Resident Evil, Ramon Salazar, and Leon meets up with Ada for the first time since Raccoon City, and eventually they go their separate ways, and Leon will run into Luis in the mines underneath the castle, who provides suppressants for the virus that Leon will use on himself and for Ashley in the future. It is discovered that Luis used to work for Umbrella as a researcher and helped Los Illuminados with their virus. Luis seems to genuinely feel guilty for all the innocent lives that he's responsible for taking, by working with these parties. So by helping Leon, he's trying to redeem himself. But he won't get that chance, however, as once they make their escape from the mines, Luis is fatally stabbed by Jack Krauser's knife, and Leon will then have to engage in hand-to-hand combat before Krauser eventually retreats. With his dying breath, Luis gives Leon the keys to his personal lab and eventually dies from his injuries. And after this, Leon will take the cart to the final part of the castle, and this is where he'll battle Salazar in his monstrous form. After finally killing him, he ends up finding a way off the island and notices that Krauser sneaks Ashley off the island in a boat. Leon will then borrow a boat with Ada as they get to the final part of the game, or the final act, or the island that the research facility is. Now, when Leon gets to this part of the island, he has to battle through hordes of Los Illuminados to get to Ashley. And finally, he is able to find Ashley, and he is able to inject her with the suppressant before he passes out next to her. Now, Sadler intends to send Ashley back to the US to infect everybody in the States, so Sadler can have control over everybody, and Leon has to put a stop to this. Unfortunately, Sadler uses the Plaga in Ashley to take control of her and knock Leon out, separating them once again. After Leon battles through the facility to fight Krauser once again, this time Krauser is mutated, and after a long fight, Leon eventually kills Krauser. After this, Leon finally gets to the part of the island where Sadler is taking refuge with Ashley. And Sadler's trying to perform a ritual to try to complete her transformation, but before this can happen, Ada jumps in and is able to destroy Sadler while Leon makes an escape with Ashley. And this next part is probably the coolest scene in this remake, and it's the scene of Leon and Ashley making their way to Luis's private lab where they're finally able to remove the parasite, but the visuals that they do for this section are so cool. So Leon and Ashley are able to remove the parasite from their bodies, and Ada is captured by Sadler. Eventually she'll be saved by Leon, and they join together to fight Sadler and get the Las Plagas Ember. And they defeat Sadler in his monstrous form and then kill him with the signature RPG kill. This eventually leads to the entire island being set into a self-destruct mode because of Ada, and Ada ends up stealing the vial and leaves Leon behind, but she also leaves him a key to the speedboat that is underneath the island in a cave, to which both Leon and Ashley need to use the speedboat to escape. After this, the two will exchange some friendly banter and head back to the safety of the United States. Ada flies off towards what is presumed to be Africa in a post-credit scene, setting up the future of the Resident Evil franchise with Albert Wesker making his long-awaited return. And that's just basically a brief story for Resident Evil 4. I didn't add all the super big details, just the necessary pieces, just for anybody who hasn't played this game. But it's a pretty great story. It's full of action, and it still is able to keep you busy while you play, whether that's because of the firing range minigame, mercenaries, or all the multiple collectibles in Resident Evil 4, and it really gives you your money's worth. But let's get into what made this game so incredible. Now, the first thing I really wanted to talk about is the combat, and this is something that plenty of people are going to agree with unless you're a fan of the older tank controls variation that they had with the original game. But with this new remake, it came with an updated combat control system and also a parry system with Leon's knife. And the reason why this is so cool is because the knife played such a huge role in the original game in terms of Leon depending on the knife for his combat fight with Krauser, but other than that, it's great that they would try to innovate the knife in a way that makes it more useful and effective against enemies. And I'm sure that this will continue to play a role in the future remakes, like for Resident Evil 5's remake, but that still remains to be seen. The gunplay also adds a huge variety of ways that you can take on the Los Illuminados cult, and even though the original game had plenty of guns, the remake increases that number, so you have to spend more time working to upgrade every single gun for the achievement. The remake also adds the ability to shoot and move at the same time, which was not a feature in the original game, and honestly was the most frustrating thing about the original game. But adding this in the remake made the game so much easier to play, even if it does remove the charm of the original. I like to play both as separate games because even though both might be the same story, they feel like completely separate experiences, with the original feeling like a corny action horror game and the remake feeling like a polished action game. But let's move on to the next piece of this amazing game. Now, the graphics for this game, along with the special effects, it really seems like they tried to push this game to its limits, and they succeeded in such an amazing way. And I'm surprised that this game didn't get any kind of wins at the Game Awards that year, because, I mean, this game was huge when it launched. And for this game, there are just tons of helicopter explosive battles and hordes of enemies and so many visual special effects, and it makes you feel like you're watching a movie. I really have to tip my hat to the people that designed this game because they did such an amazing job with this, and it feels like such a step up and such an improvement from Resident Evil 3, and it's overall such a big piece of the Resident Evil 4 pie. But I mean, I know that little section was kind of a small part of this video, but I just want to get into the next big thing because this makes up a good majority of what makes this game so incredible. Now, for this part of the video, this is a big part of why Resident Evil 4 is amazing. Because even though the story is the exact same, without this story, Resident Evil probably wouldn't have been able to turn the page into the direction that it's in now. And even though they did have a bumpy ride with Resident Evil 5 and 6, they finally managed to bring it back to its roots. And I feel like they couldn't have gotten to that point without this game. Now, and the reason why this makes Resident Evil 4's remake so incredible is because the way that they were able to work in the story for this remake, it makes the story feel more fleshed out because it adds background details that were either missing or not released at the time that the original game was made. Like, they managed to add Operation Javier's details, which that game released after Resident Evil 4, and it just makes the remake feel more like a complete, comprehensive story than the original. Because the original, I remember, there was just so many things that left me confused with the story when I played that originally. And playing the remake, it's just nice to see that they acknowledged those games that came out afterwards, that were still part of Leon's story during his saga with Las Plagas. I also liked that they acknowledged Resident Evil 5 at the end of the game because they know exactly that's the direction that the game is going into. But it was just nice to see that that's something that we can expect in the future. But I feel like fixing the story for this game also fixed a lot of the pieces that either did not work with pacing-wise or left you feeling like you completely missed something. So playing this remake just gives you more of the Resident Evil 4 experience. And I mean, that's just the most incredible thing about Resident Evil 4's remake. Because just as much as I love the original Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 4's remake just feels so complete, and it's just such a satisfying game to play. Every time I've played the remake so far, I've just felt nothing but love for this game. And it's one of the first Resident Evil games that I've been able to experience as it has released. Because I haven't been a fan of this franchise for very long. I mean, I've just recently started playing these games as of 2020. So, you know, just hopping into it now and just being so excited for each game to release is all really attributed to the release of games like Resident Evil 8 and Resident Evil 4's remake. It's just, these games have just been such a massive part of my life since I've started playing them. And it's just, I have nothing but respect for these games. Except for Resident Evil 3. But that's, you know, something I talked about in my last video. But let's get into the last piece of what made Resident Evil 4 so incredible. So I know these last two are kind of completely different subjects of their own. I just forgot that I didn't add in my mention of the DLC. Because Separate Ways was done so well and honestly made the game 100 times better and made the DLC actually worth the money. Because I remember playing other games with any kind of downloadable content like for Resident Evil 7, and I just felt like the DLCs for those games didn't really add up to what they were asking for the price. And Separate Ways just does such a great job in telling Ada's story and kind of her perspective of things as she's going through the island. I mean, and they did such a great job with Separate Ways originally in the Resident Evil 4 original game, but I just feel like it is just so much more fun to play as the DLC for the remake, because even though Ada's voice is completely different and she might be designed a little bit differently, it's just so, it's like an action spy thriller. That's what it feels like when I played the DLC, and honestly I felt more scared of the DLC parts than I did with the original story, and that's really saying something. And it's just, the DLC is just such a huge part, and so many fans are so happy that they continued with the Separate Ways DLC, because for a while we were unsure that if that's what they were going to do. Now, on the side for exploration, this is something that wasn't very prevalent in previous Resident Evil games, besides for maybe Resident Evil 8, because that's kind of what started the open world trend. And supposedly Resident Evil 9 is going to have that too, and hopefully it's done in the same way that Resident Evil 4's remake and Resident Evil 8 did. But it was kind of cool to be able to explore the map and find cool Easter eggs and collectibles for Resident Evil 4. But for Resident Evil 2, I mean, all we had was letters and emails that you could read to get more of the story. And it's just so cool that they managed to add more to the world that was already Resident Evil 4. They added in different treasures and a merchant shop so you could sell those treasures, and it honestly just works so well with the rest of the game, and it doesn't feel out of place whatsoever. And I think that's just such an amazing thing. And my favorite part, I think, out of all of this for the exploration is when it comes down to exploring the lake, because this is probably one of the biggest areas that you can explore. I thought it was really cool to be able to explore the lake because you find a piece of Resident Evil 4 lore, which is the tunnel system that's in the game. Now, I'm not 100% sure if this was confirmed, but the lore goes back to Luis's dad, who supposedly traveled through these tunnel systems and eventually dies. And in the remake, you can find your way into this tunnel, and this is where you find a dead person. I don't know if it's a skeleton or I remember it being a person, but it adds a little bit to that lore that was already put down in the previous Resident Evil 4 game. Now, even though most of you probably didn't explore that much unless you are a diehard fan, the whole reason of having this open world experience now is for the diehard fans to search every inch of the map to get every collectible they can find. And I mean, that's exactly what I did when the game released, and I thought it was just absolutely amazing that they added this in, and it made the game so much more fun for me. I mean, I explored every crack and crevice on the map that I could find. So the exploration to me is just such a huge part in what made this game so good to begin with. So I know a lot of people, when these remakes come out, talk about the cut content, but I feel like most of the cut content that was from the original Resident Evil 4 game was eventually repurposed for the DLC. So I just think this game has turned out to be absolutely incredible. I mean, who else would want to see Ada in her tight dress dodging lasers? Man, I'm such a degenerate. But I mean, these are all the things that I could think of that really made this game absolutely amazing. If I missed anything, just please let me know down in the comment section. And while you're down there, don't forget to let me know your favorite Resident Evil 4 moment or your favorite Leon quote. And that's really going to do it, though. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And thanks again for watching, guys. And have a good night.